5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, and welcome to the BrainSpace Software YouTube learning channel called Brainwaves. This new channel will provide you with access to a series of videos focused on BrainSpace demonstrations and how-to training videos. In this video, I will demonstrate how to create a new dataset from an existing Relativity workspace. Now let's begin the demonstration. Okay, we're now going to demonstrate how to build a new dataset from an existing Relativity workspace. And to do that, we're going to go to the administration section of the application. Now you must be a super admin to be able to perform this operation. First thing we're going to do is click on New Dataset. And we're going to give our dataset a name. In this case, we'll just call it Relativity Test. Below you have the option of specifying which BrainSpace user groups should have access to this particular dataset. The default user group, which is simply represents all of the superadmins, is enabled by default. So all of the superadmins will have access to this dataset by default. You can obviously turn that off, but it is turned on by default. So we'll click Create to create the dataset. And the next step in the process is we'll need to choose a connector. And here is where we're going to select Relativity as our data source. So whichever Relativity environment or Relativity instance contains the workspace that you want to build a data set from, you'll need to select that Relativity environment. Now we've already created a Relativity instance or environment called Relativity Demo, and this is the environment that contains the workspace that we want to build a data set from. So I'm going to select that Relativity environment, and you'll see the next thing that happens is BrainSpace presents us with all of the workspaces within that particular Relativity instance. I'm going to select the Enron 1 million workspace and click Save and Proceed. The next thing I'm going to be asked is whether I want to limit which documents I want to build a data set off of by using a save search. So you can limit the number of documents or which documents get fed into your data set in BrainSpace by selecting a particular Relativity save search that already exists within the workspace we've connected to. In this case, the Enron 1 million Relativity workspace. So here are all of the available save searches in that workspace. So I can pre-build a Relativity save search limiting which documents feed in to my BrainSpace dataset. I'm going to actually not select a Relativity save search. I have that option so that all the documents in that workspace get fed in to my BrainSpace dataset. So I'll just simply click Proceed, but you can select a Relativity save search to limit the number of documents that come in. The next thing that happens is the system will automatically do a license check. It will compare the total number of documents that you currently have in BrainSpace and then the number of documents that you will have in BrainSpace after this data set has finished. So you've got your current number, which is before this data set is built. You've got your post ingestion number of documents after this data set is built. So what it will show you after you complete the building of this data set, how many documents, active documents you will have that will count against your license. So in this example, if you've purchased a 20 million document license, after you build this data set, you will now have 12 million, roughly, active documents that are counting against your license, leaving you with about 8 million documents left for your particular license. If you were out of license, if you were trying to build a data set that's going to go over your current license limit, the system would stop you here. You would get a notice or a warning. So we're going to click Confirm to continue. And then the next phase in the dataset building process is you're going to map your Relativity fields into BrainSpace. So you're going to select which fields you want to include in your BrainSpace data set. Now, by default, there are a number of fields that are already pre-mapped. For example, BrainSpace requires two specific fields for all data sets: a unique identifier for every document or record, and that's called a control number, and the extracted text or the unstructured text for every document or record. That is what we call the body text. So those two fields will automatically be mapped. They're required on every data set. And then there are another or a number of fields that we can create or automatically map in addition to the control number or the unique identifier in the body text field. And those are basically email header fields. So if we can recognize a particular relativity field as being a specific email metadata header field, we will map that automatically. For example, email BCC, we were able to map that to our standard BCC field. And email CC, same thing, and so on. So basically all the email header information or metadata can be automatically mapped in most cases if we can recognize the relativity field name as being one of those specific header fields. So these fields get pre-mapped, and then everything else that's not mapped, we'll ask you to map manually. So we'll let you select which fields you want to include in your data set. So the more metadata fields that you want to filter on or search against, you want to make sure that those metadata fields are included in this mapping and in your data set. So for example, if custodian is an important field that you want to filter or search against, then you want to make sure that you map custodian to the custodian field. If there are other date fields, such as the last modified date, that you want to see on the dashboard in the timeline, you want to be able to filter against or search against, then you want to make sure that those fields, those date fields, get mapped as well to what we just generically call the date field. Only the sent date has a specific and separate BrainSpace field to map to, and we automatically do that in most cases. So all the other date fields that you want to include in your data set should be mapped to the date field. And obviously your custodian field should be mapped. However you've named this field in Relativity, it should be mapped to our BrainSpace custodian field, and so on. So you'll go through this list, you'll map which fields you want to include in your BrainSpace data set. And once you've gone through this exercise of mapping all of your fields, your relativity fields, to the appropriate BrainSpace fields, you have the option of saving that mapping, giving it a name. You can click Save Current Field Map, give your field map a name, click Save, and then that'll be an available field map in your list here that you can select going forward. So you can, rather than rebuild or remap fields for another workspace, or if you're going to rebuild a data set off of this workspace, you can simply use the field map that you've saved. And you can save multiple field maps, so we give you that option as well. So you only really have to go through this process once if you have a standard field mapping that you're going to use for all of your cases, or at least all of your cases for a certain client. So at this point, I've gone through the process of creating a data set, giving it a name, specifying which user groups should by default have access to that data set once it's finished building. And then I specified where my data source was located. Where's the source of my data coming from? And in this case, Relativity, a Relativity instance. And obviously we have Nuix as well, or you can load from a DAT file or XML. But this particular video is talking about building a data set from a Relativity workspace. So we specified which Relativity instance contains our workspace. And remember, we specified which Relativity workspace we want to build a data set from. And then we had the option of specifying a particular Relativity safe search if we wanted to limit which documents get fed into our data set. And remember, we just left that blank and because we want all documents from that workspace to be fed into the data set. And then we arrived at this phase, which is the mapping process. Once this process is finished, we can click Continue. And now we have our data set built, or created, I should say. So all of the settings have been set up, the basic settings. And at this point, there's a couple of things we can do. We have the relativity overlay, which if you recall, we overlay a series of fields back into Relativity automatically at the end of the ingestion process. So at the end of building your data set, the last step in the process is we feed back a bunch of analytics information into Relativity, things such as near duplicate information, exact text duplicate information. We push back the BDID, which you recall is the intelligent sort field, so you can sort lexically similar documents together in review batches to accelerate review. We also push back email threading information, which includes inclusiveness detection, uh, different sorting options. So there's a lot of information that gets fed back automatically, and by default that overlay is turned on. So you have the option of turning that off. If you're not planning on using that information in Relativity, it's on by default. Entity extraction, the process of automatically extracting all of our standard set of entities, the PII entities such as social security numbers, credit card numbers, date of births, those entities plus other entities such as geographic locations, monetary values, email addresses, URLs, those things that BrainSpace will automatically detect and extract and present to you on the dashboard so you can filter against them, similar to a metadata filter. In order to take advantage of entity extraction, you'll need to turn that on. It's off by default. So if you want to take advantage of entity extraction for this particular data set, make sure you turn that on or enable that option prior to actually kicking off the building of this data set. There are some advanced options as well. You can modify your stop words or filter words. You can modify the max field size or index field sizes for your data. These are the defaults. I would recommend before you modify these that you speak with our support team um, because we've gone through some research or done some research and come up with these defaults. So we recommend you check with us before you change those values. And then obviously if you're dealing with different languages other than English, you can specify a trumping order for the stop words for each of those different languages. These are all part of the advanced configuration. Typically you're not touching um, these default settings. You're going to leave them as is in most cases. And you're now ready to save the changes that you made. In this particular change that I made is I turned on entity extraction. And at this point, you're ready to build your data set. So to kick off the build process, you simply click build. And when you do that, this screen will refresh and you'll get a dialog box here that'll just show you the status of the build as it's building. Um, when you click build, you have three options associated with building a data set. Because this is a data set that we're building for the very first time, we're going to do a full analytics with ingest, which is a full build, going through the full build process. And notice because this data set is brand new, it's the only option that is enabled. The other two are disabled. So to kick this off, I would simply click run this build type. The other two options, full analytics without ingest, you would, if you're going to just reanalyze your existing documents that you have in your data set and you're not introducing any new documents, you want to run this process. So this you could run after you've completed, the building process for the first time, and perhaps you're just going to rerun the analytics. We can do that without doing a full build process. And then the third option is I'm adding some additional documents to an existing data set, and I want to fold those documents in to my data set as it exists. So all the themes, all the, in terms of the cluster wheel that have been identified previously, we'll just figure out where those new documents should live in those existing themes. So we're not going to introduce any new themes, but for existing information, we'll fit those documents in to the existing indexes and existing themes that BrainSpace has recognized. So you'll run this process when you're incrementally introducing some new documents into an existing data set. If you do want to, if you've got 1,000,000 documents and you're trying to add another 1,000,000 documents, in that case, we'd recommend you do a full analytics with ingest because you're introducing a million other documents into your data set, and those documents might have new vocabulary or new terms and new themes that the system hasn't seen yet. And so in that situation, you'll want to do a full analytics with ingest to make sure that those new themes are identified and presented to you for analysis and review. So at this point, because I'm building this data set for the first time, I'm going to click on run this build type. And you have the option of scheduling your build to run at a certain time of day, and you could even set it up to run on a recurring basis, or I can just build it as soon as possible. And here's the dialog box that I was talking about. So now you can track the status of the building process by just keeping an eye on this this queue here and watching the status of your build as it moves through the process from ingestion to building to the overlay process. We run at a rate of about 1 million documents an hour. So in most cases where we know the average case size is about 2 million documents, we can finish in about 2 hours, maybe a little over 2 hours. So I would say this will finish fairly quickly. You can get a little status, how many it's ingested versus how many it has to ingest. So you have some kind of indication how far along the process is. But you'll just keep an eye on this dialog here in this dataset queue to track your dataset as it's being built. This concludes our demonstration. For additional information on how to use any of our features, including step-by-step instructions, please visit our new online user documentation portal called BrainSpace Support Station at docs.brainspace.com. If you are a new BrainSpace user or do not have access to this site, please contact BrainSpace Technical Support at support@brainspace.com and request access. Thank you.